Hello, my friends. Welcome to Timeless Stories. I am so glad you are here today. Take a slow breath, make yourself comfortable, and let the story begin. Now, I want to ask you something. Imagine you travel to a library in Paris, France. You ask to see some old notebooks written more than 100 years ago. The librarian says yes, but first you must sign a document. A document that says you understand the danger, because these notebooks, these old, yellowed, quiet notebooks, are still radioactive today. They are kept inside special boxes lined with lead. Lead is a very heavy metal. It blocks dangerous energy called radiation. To hold one of these notebooks is to touch something still alive with invisible power. Even after a century, those notebooks belonged to Marie Curie, and today we are going to tell her story. This story has cold rooms, secret schools, and a soft blue glow in the dark. It has a woman who the world told no, over and over again. And it has one of the greatest scientific discoveries in human history. This story will also help you practice your English. The vocabulary is simple. The sentences are short, but the ideas are very deep. Listen carefully. You will understand more than you think. And before we begin, write in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is in your country right now. Now, let us begin. The year was 1867. In the city of Warsaw, in the country of Poland, a baby girl was born. Her name was Maria Sklodowska. One day, the whole world would know her as Marie Curie. But on that day, she was just a small, quiet baby in a cold city, and the city was cold in more ways than one. Poland at that time was not a free country. It had been taken over by the Russian Empire. The Russian rulers controlled everything. The government, the schools, even the language people were allowed to speak. Polish children could not learn Polish history in school. They could not use the Polish language in class. Everything had to be in Russian. Maria's father was a teacher. He taught mathematics and physics, but the Russian authorities did not trust him. They took away his job. The family became poor. Despite this, despite the fear, despite the poverty, her father believed in one thing above all others: learning. He kept his scientific instruments at home: glass tubes, small measuring tools, the beautiful, careful equipment of science. Young Maria would stand in front of these objects for long, quiet minutes. She wanted to understand how they worked. She wanted to understand how everything worked. She was an extraordinary student. She could read by the age of 4. She remembered everything she heard. Her teachers noticed her immediately. She stood apart. But in Warsaw, at that time, there was one door that was completely locked. Girls could not attend university. Not because they were not smart, not because they could not learn, simply because they were girls. For Maria, this felt like a wall made of stone. She could see the other side. She could almost touch it. but she could not pass through. So she and her friends built their own door. A small group of young women in Warsaw started a secret school. They called it the Floating University. Floating, because the location was always changing. One week, classes were held in someone's kitchen. The next week, in a small back room across the city. They moved constantly so the Russian police would not find them. It was dangerous. If they were caught, they could be arrested. But they kept studying anyway. And Maria made a plan with her older sister, Bronia. It was a pact, a serious agreement between two people who loved each other very much. Here was the plan. Maria would go to work as a governess. A governess is a woman who lives with a wealthy family and teaches their children. Maria would send nearly all of her salary to Paris so that Bronia could study medicine at university there. And when Bronia finished, when she had her degree and her independence, she would send money back so that Maria could come to Paris and study too. It was a plan that required enormous patience and enormous sacrifice. Maria worked as a governess for 5 years. 5 years in other people's houses, far from Warsaw, far from her family. Teaching other people's children while her own dreams waited quietly in the corner. She sent almost everything she earned to her sister. She kept only enough to survive. But she did not waste those 5 years. At night, when the children were asleep and the house was dark and still, Maria opened her books, mathematics, physics, chemistry. She wrote long letters to Bronia, asking what to read, what to study next. She taught herself, alone, with no classroom and no teacher. Everything she could. She was preparing herself for a future she could not yet see. But she refused to stop believing in it. And then, at the age of 24, Maria finally got on a train to Paris. It was 1891. Paris was the center of the scientific world. The Sorbonne, the great university of Paris, was one of the finest institutions in all of Europe. And unlike Warsaw, the Sorbonne accepted women students. When Maria arrived, she made a quiet but meaningful decision. She changed the spelling of her name from the Polish Maria to the French Marie. She was not hiding who she was. She was not ashamed of her country or her past. She was simply stepping into a new world. And she was ready. But Paris was not easy. She lived in a tiny room near the university. There was no heating. In winter, she could see her own breath inside the room. Sometimes, the water in her small bowl froze overnight. She had almost no money. Some days, she ate only bread and a little piece of chocolate. Sometimes she felt so weak from hunger that she fainted during her lectures. But she studied. She sat in the great university halls, one of very few women. In the room, some of the male students found it unusual to see her there. Some professors looked at her with surprise. But Marie did not look at them. She looked at the board. She filled her notebooks. She worked harder than almost anyone around her. In 1893, she completed her degree in physics. She graduated first in her class. 1 year later, she completed a second degree in mathematics. She graduated second in her class. Think about that for a moment. She had studied in a frozen room. She had eaten almost nothing. She had worked in a language that was not her own, and she had finished at the top of her class. Twice. But the world was not finished giving her challenges, and she was not finished answering them. It was in Paris that Marie met a quiet, gentle man named Pierre Curie. He was a physicist, a scientist who studies energy, matter, and the physical world. They began to talk about science, and then they began to talk about everything. In 1895, they married. Marie wore a dark blue dress to the wedding, not white. She could not afford a dress she would wear only once. So she chose blue, practical, dark, a dress she could also wear in the laboratory. That small detail tells you a great deal about Marie Curie. Together, they worked in a small, damp laboratory. The building was cold in winter and too hot in summer. The roof was low. The walls were sometimes damp. By almost any measure, it was not a proper place for great science. But they kept working. They were investigating something that a French scientist named Henri Becquerel had recently noticed. Certain natural materials seemed to produce invisible rays, energy that could pass through solid objects. With no obvious source. Nobody fully understood it yet. Marie began to study it more deeply, and she made a discovery that changed the history of science. She found that these invisible rays did not come from two materials reacting together. They came from inside the atoms of the material itself. The energy was built into the very structure of the matter. It was a quality that had never been described before. She gave this quality a name. She called it radioactivity. The word comes from the Latin word radius, which means ray. Radio from ray, activity, because the material is always producing energy, always active. That word was her invention, radioactivity. And then, in 1898, Marie and Pierre made an announcement that amazed the entire scientific world. They had found two new elements, two materials that existed in nature but had never been identified or named before. The first they named polonium. Polonium comes from Polonia, the Latin name for Poland. At that time, Poland still did not exist as a free country. It had been divided and controlled by other empires for more than a century. There was no Polish flag, no Polish voice in the world. By naming this element after her homeland, Marie was saying something clear and proud to the world. She was saying, Poland exists. Poland matters. We are here. The second element they named radium. From radius, the ray, this material produced a faint, beautiful blue glow in the dark. In their cold laboratory, at night, Marie and Pierre could see it shining softly on the shelves. It was light that no one had ever seen before. Light born from invisible work, to produce even a tiny amount of pure radium. Marie and Pierre processed several tons of a dark mineral called pitch blende. They stirred, they filtered, they separated by hand. In the cold room, year after year, the physical work was enormous. The patience was extraordinary. But slowly, from tons and tons of ordinary dark rock, a small, glowing thing appeared. In 1903, Marie Curie received the Nobel Prize in Physics. A Nobel Prize is one of the highest honors in the world. It is given each year to people who have done extraordinary work in science, literature, or peace. She shared the prize with Pierre and with Henri Becquerel. She was the first woman in history to receive a Nobel Prize. Let that be still for a moment. The first in all of history. But then, in 1906, something terrible happened. Pierre was crossing a street in Paris on a rainy April afternoon. The road was wet, the street was crowded and loud. A horse-drawn carriage came around a corner, moving too fast. Pierre did not see it in time. He was knocked down. He died that same day. Marie was completely alone. She had lost her partner, her closest friend, and the person who had believed in her work more than anyone. For a long time, the world felt silent and empty. The grief was very deep, very real. She wrote in her journal, "I have lost everything. My husband, my best friend, my laboratory companion. I am left with a terrible sense of desolation." But she did not stop working. The University of Paris offered her Pierre's teaching position. She accepted. In doing so, she became the first woman ever to teach as a full professor at the Sorbonne. On the day she walked into the lecture hall for the first time, the room was completely full. Students, journalists, scientists, curious visitors from across the city. They had all come to see this moment. To watch this woman walk through the door that had never been opened for her kind. She sat down. She opened her notes, and she began to speak from the exact point where Pierre had left his last lecture. From the same sentence, as if he had never been gone. The room was completely silent. In 1911, Marie Curie received a second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry, for the discovery of polonium and radium, and for isolating pure radium. She remains, to this day, the only person in history to win Nobel Prizes in two completely different sciences, physics and chemistry. Two different Nobel Prizes. Two different fields. One woman. The world said her name with deep respect, and yet the French Academy of Sciences refused to accept her as a member. She was nominated, the scientists voted, and she lost by a single vote because she was a woman. The world that had told her she did not belong was still not completely ready to say that she did. But Marie kept working. During the First World War, she saw soldiers dying, not only from bullets and explosions, but from wounds that could not be found quickly enough, broken bones hidden beneath skin, pieces of metal buried inside the body. Marie had an idea. She designed mobile X-ray units, vehicles fitted with equipment that could photograph the inside of a living body. Doctors could use these machines to see what was invisible to the human eye. She called them petites curies, little curies. She drove them herself to field hospitals near the front lines. She trained nurses to operate the equipment. She worked long hours in dirty, dangerous conditions. It is estimated that more than 1 million soldiers were helped by her mobile units during the war. One woman, one idea, 1 million lives. In 1934, Marie Curie died. She was 66 years old. The cause was aplastic anemia, a condition where the bone marrow, the soft material inside bones that makes blood, can no longer produce enough healthy blood cells. Her illness was caused by decades of working with radiation. The very thing she had discovered, the very thing she had named, the very thing she had spent her life studying, it had slowly, invisibly made her ill. She did not know the danger when she began. No one did. She carried radioactive materials in her coat pockets. She stored glowing test tubes near her bed at night. She wrote in notebooks that are still radioactive today. 100 years later, her body still contains measurable radiation. And polonium, the element she named after a country that was not yet free, now has its permanent place on the periodic table of elements. Every chemistry student in the world studies it. The table, she named after a captive country, is now taught in every school on Earth. My friends, every great life contains lessons. Here are 5 that Marie Curie left for us. Maria worked as a governess for 5 years. She gave her money to her sister. She waited. She studied alone at night. She did not panic. She did not give up. She built a bridge to the future, one small plank at a time. Patience is not giving up on your dream. It is choosing the longer, stronger road to reach it. The university was closed to women. So Marie and her friends built the floating university. When the world says no, you do not have to accept no as your final answer. You can find another path. You can make your own path. The door being locked does not mean the room is unreachable. Marie studied in rooms so cold her water froze. She ate almost nothing. She fainted from hunger, and still she graduated first in her class. The outside conditions were terrible, but her inner fire was stronger. Comfort is not what you need to succeed. You need something that burns from the inside. When Pierre died, Marie did not disappear. She walked into the lecture hall. She opened her notes. She began. This does not mean she was not hurting. She was hurting deeply. But she knew that stopping would not bring him back. That continuing was also a form of love for him, for the work, for the students waiting in that silent room. Marie named radioactivity. She named polonium. She named radium. By giving these invisible forces and unknown elements a name, she made them visible to the world, to science, to history. You also have the power to name what you are doing. Not just studying English. Maybe you are building a bridge to a new life. Maybe you are lighting a room that used to be dark. Name it. Make it real. And so, my friends, the story of Marie Curie comes quietly to its end. She was told, from the very beginning, that science was not for her. Not because she lacked ability. Not because she lacked intelligence. Simply because she was a woman. The doors were locked. The rooms were cold. The world said no in 100 different ways. She kept going anyway. And somewhere in a small, damp laboratory in Paris, in the darkness of a winter night, there was a soft, faint, beautiful blue glow. Radium, the element she had found. Light made from invisible work. Light that had never existed in the world before she looked for it. Now, my friend, I want to say something to you. You have your own kind of darkness. Maybe English still feels difficult. Maybe there are moments when the words do not come easily. Maybe there are days when the progress feels very slow. But here you are. You are in your own quiet room, doing your own quiet work. And every word you learn is a small glow. Not visible to anyone else, perhaps, but real and growing. Marie Curie worked for years in the cold and the dark before the world noticed what she was building. You may feel that way too, that you are working quietly and the progress is hard to see. But it is there. Every story you listen to is light. Every sentence that becomes a little clearer is light. Every new word your mind holds on to, that is light. You are making light. Slowly, steadily, the way she did. And steady, as Marie Curie showed us, is the most powerful thing of all. Keep listening. Keep learning. Keep glowing. This is Timeless Stories. I want to say clearly, this story is not about supporting or judging Marie Curie. It is about understanding a life. A real human life with courage and loss and extraordinary work. If this story touched you, I would love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, which part of Marie Curie's life stayed with you the most? Was it the radioactive notebooks still glowing after 100 years? The moment she walked into the lecture hall after losing Pierre and began where he left off? Or the soft blue light of radium shining quietly in the dark? If you are watching for the first time, welcome. There are many more stories waiting here on Timeless Stories. Stories of people who changed the world. Stories told in simple English so you can learn the language and the history at the same time. Subscribe if you have not yet. And come back soon. Until next time, my friend, take care of yourself. And never stop learning.